Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We certainly want to give thanks that we were all able to make it here safely today. As you all know, we're here for not great reasons, I should say. Many of you have covered the persecution of Keith Davis Jr. since 2015. The reason for this press conference is for the world, obviously nationwide. This has been brought to the homes of persons that are interested in seeing criminal justice reform. But the reason this press conference is being brought to you here today is at this point, with every trial, we have seen more and more evidence that Mr. Davis is innocent. Not just there's a presumption of innocence, but Mr. Keith Davis Jr. is in fact innocent. For many of you that don't know me, my name is LaToya Francis Williams with the law office of A. Dwight Pettit. You all may remember that we served as Mr. Davis's criminal defense counsel for his first few trials, but we're also civil attorneys. Much of our practice focuses on civil rights, police misconduct, and government overreach, and that's what we have here today. All of the above. The Davis family was gracious enough to ask us to stay on board as civil attorneys. What we have seen happen to Mr. Davis over these years was not, as we say, just a persecution. It is a persecution of the gravest accounts. He has suffered physically. He has suffered reputation. He has suffered financially. He has suffered the loss of his filial relationships. And what you all must understand is Mr. Davis could be you. Mr. Davis could be your loved one. And the only person or persons that could put a stop to this is the state's attorney for Baltimore City. The sum total of this press conference is to demand that these charges be dropped. Drop the charges. That's what we scream, drop the charges. As you all have seen throughout the first few trials, the State's Attorney's Office for Baltimore City has ignored facts that demonstrate Mr. Davis's innocence. They have misconstrued testimony. They have ignored their own witnesses' testimony. They have misled the public. They have misled even themselves. And the cries earlier on, meaning the cries before today, was a plea, in this case to Marilyn Mosby, to have some conscience, because she is the state's attorney for Baltimore City. But the plea is now changed. The plea is simply drop the charges. In any jurisdiction in this country, we pride ourselves on our criminal justice system because 3/4 of the process is the justice, the transparency, the honesty, the ability for the accused to be heard inside and outside of court. And so we're asking, as we go forward, that we hold the state's attorney's office accountable for what has happened to Mr. Davis since 2015, which is an unjust persecution. Now, it's our understanding that there, of course, is a new trial date set. 4 trials is enough. As you've heard publicly from esteemed lawyers, that if you can't get a clean conviction without lying, without cheating, without hiding evidence, then it's time to move on. For the sake of criminal justice reform, for the sake of the integrity of the state's attorney's office, it is time to move on. Mr. Davis certainly reserves the right to exercise his right to bring his civil suit against any and everyone that had a hand in this persecution all these years. But right now, our priority is that the State's Attorney's Office for Baltimore City recognize that it is time to move on. You all have had and seen over the years glaring issues and points to point to not just the inconsistencies. We ask that you, when you publish and you talk about Mr. Davis's story, that you not ignore that. The obligation of every State's Attorney's Office, every district attorney, is to assess and analyze. Can you convict an individual, an accused, beyond a reasonable doubt? Gone are the days when you throw something up and hope it sticks. That's not the standard we have here in the United States of America. That's not our standard. And with all we know, we are demanding that the charges be dropped. Now, you'll hear from a number of persons that are not just educated, but well vested in Mr. Davis's freedom. Because Mr. Davis's freedom means a change to the criminal justice system. Mr. Davis's freedom means there will soon be an acknowledgement that he is not guilty of the charges that he stands here and faced. So you'll hear from a number of us, and first I will bring up Ms. Belfina, who was a community activist, who when she found Mr. Davis's story was moved to voicing her opinion and moved to putting her efforts and her intelligence and her resources into making sure that the truth be told. At the end, certainly we will have a few moments for some questions, and we hope that you take away from this press conference that Mr. Davis and his support and his team, his network, will not give up. The facts have not changed since 2015. Despite every trial that goes by, there's more and more evidence that Mr. Davis is in fact innocent. But those facts have not changed. Every story that you hear and see coming out of the State's Attorney's Office for Baltimore City, scrutinize it. We ask that you hold our elected officials accountable and to the standards of the law. That's all we ask. So with that said, I thank you again in advance. I thank you again for taking the time to pay attention to what needs to be a righting of a wrong over a number of years. With that, Ms. Belfina.
Hello, everybody. My name is Belfina Yawan, as Ms. Williams said. I'm a community organizer, I'm a restorative practices practitioner, and I'm also a community member of Baltimore City. All of the community work that I do in this city is about imagining and cultivating a world where this case, Keith Davis Jr., and the violence that he has faced is not possible, not just for Keith, but all of us. My work and my commitment is to a world where nobody gets to be shot at by 4 Baltimore police officers and they see no justice. I'm committed to creating a world where no community member can hear about a case like Keith Davis Jr. and not be moved to act. We cannot be silent because, like Ms. Williams said, Keith Davis Jr. is all of us, right? I hold a special place here. I get to be a supporter of Keith Davis Jr., but I call them my family member. To Kelly, his wife, and to their 4 beautiful children, who I always bring into this space. Because at the core of it, what people forget is that Keith is also a father, which means for the past 5-6 years, he has been stripped away and completely disconnected from his children. Keith does not get to tuck his children into bed like all of us do. Keith does not get to see his children's first moments like all of us do. Keith's children cannot run into his arms and embrace him and give him a hug like all of us have that opportunity to. He deserves that much. To Baltimore City residents, I urge all of us to once again understand that we cannot remain silent, right? If we allow a precedent to be set with Keith Davis Jr. case, it means that the Baltimore State's Attorney Office can continue to do this again and again and again. Keith Davis Jr. has become the most tried man in U.S. history. How can Baltimore City and our leaders, right, who say that we're committed to justice in a new way, allow for our city to set such a precedent? It is not possible, right? And so what that means is that we must drop the charges. Because Keith is somebody. He is our somebody. He is a community member, and we're asking that he be returned to us. Thank you so much.
That's great. I'm DeRay McKesson, a civil rights activist, a son of Baltimore, and a citizen of Baltimore. I'm involved in this case because the truth is actually just so clear that we don't need to embellish it. I don't need to do anything to it. I just need to show you. And we care about this case because it is a national case, as Belfina said, that there are few people who have been tried for the same crime as many times as Keith Davis has. And I'll talk about 5 buckets, but again, the truth is so clear, and that's why we have props and things to show you that, like, It's already there. The first is that multiple people lied in this case. That we think about the state's attorney herself, Marilyn Mosby. She went on the radio in May of this year and said that Keith Davis is a convicted killer. That is just not true. She knows, like I know, that there have been 4 murder trials, there have been 2 hung juries, and 2 overturned convictions. He has been convicted before, and they have both been overturned. There is no standing conviction. Why did the Baltimore City State's Attorney go on the radio and say that he is a convicted murderer? That is just not true. The second, we think about Detective Vini in this case. There was a question of how did they even connect the gun between the robbery and the murder? How? Detective Vini got on the stand and he said that there was an officer, Glenn Johnson, who was in the elevator. And Officer Glenn Johnson told him that, you know what, I saw a gun in my case that you should think about. Here's the best part of that story. Officer Glenn Johnson doesn't exist. What does that even mean? How are we still here? But those are just a handful of the things that are just outright untrue in this case. The second is that there's no real evidence linking Keith Davis to this at all. So prosecutors in a couple of the cases have said on the stand that Keith's DNA is on the Ravens bag, if you know the case. That is also not true. The DNA test comes back inconclusive. That is what the test said, that is actually what the state's evidence also says. They did what's called probabilistic genotyping that says that there's a probability that Keith's DNA might be on the test. It is a weak probability, and what we learned from experts is that there's a probability that a random person walking down the street, that their DNA is also on the bag. It is not true that Keith's DNA is on that bag, and they have said that as truth. The DNA test from the state does not say that. Every single eyewitness in this case, every eyewitness, including the police, give a description of a person that is not Keith Davis. That is just true. One of the officers who runs and says that he never loses eyesight, he gives a description of a guy with braids. Keith has a fade. The other officer says that the guy I'm chasing has glasses on, dark glasses. Keith didn't have glasses on that day. The guy who gets carjacked says that the person who carjacked him had plaids. That's not Keith Davis. Every single person who sees a photo array in this case and is asked to choose the person who is the suspect does not choose Keith Davis. Every single one of them. Now the third is that the evidence, like what the state's attorney's office has said is the best evidence in this case, is also flimsy. And again, you don't need to believe me. It is actually just in the transcripts. I'll show you one, and one is, this is the testimony that is between the firearms examiner and the lawyer. And we can just go over it. So again, I'll repeat my question. Your testimony is you measured. As in measured the shell casings to match them to the gun. He says, no, ma'am. You did not measure anything on the shell casings? No, ma'am. Okay, so you eyeballed it? Yes, ma'am. The idea that somebody could be facing 50 years in jail and the firearms examiner eyeballed it, I mean, that just can't be good enough. At a different part of the trial, when they say, did you take notes? He says no. Did you take photographs? He says no. How are we here? I don't have this pulled out as a pullout, but the fingerprint analyst too. Did you take notes? She says we're too busy in Baltimore City to take notes. How? She describes an elaborate process of matching the fingerprint to the gun. And then on the stand, the lawyer says, well, it looks like you went to evidence control, picked up the gun, went back to your office, did the process, and took it back to evidence control in 6 minutes. And she's like, I guess that's true. And you're like, again, how are we here? The best evidence in this case is no evidence at all. And one of the last things I'll say is that the reason that we care about this is not only about Keith Davis, but it is about how many other people in this city are Keith Davis too. How many other people are facing charges because the fingerprint examiner didn't have time to take notes? How many other people are facing charges because the ballistics expert eyeballed it? What does that even mean? So the demand, as Ms. Williams said, is to drop the charges. That is the first demand. There also needs to be a deep look into the forensic practices of the Baltimore City Police Department. How many other people are facing incredible sentences when the truth is actually just clear? And the very last thing I'll say is another pullout that we have. And this to me is always the most shocking thing of the entire case. And I'll just go right here. Do you have any evidence whatsoever that indicates that the K5, which is the gun in question, was fired? No, ma'am. How is there a murder if the gun was never fired? I don't know. Now today, what we have released in the timing, what we've released in the timing of this press conference is we've cataloged over 200 inconsistencies, lies, and problems across all 5 trials. You will see when you go to the website, keithdavisjr.com, you will be able to see not only a description, but you'll be able to click and see the transcript for yourself. We have nothing to hide. The truth is actually damning enough in this case. I'll stop here. I'll turn it over to Kelly Davis, the wife of Keith Davis Jr.
Thank you guys for being here. This has been a journey. It has not been a sprint. It has been a marathon, and it seems to be continuing to be that. Keith is in a cage right now. Right now. It is imminent that we continue to fight. It is imminent because he is a human being. He's a person. Like she said, he's my somebody. Today is my birthday. I'm not with my husband. I'm here with you all. Sunday is my wedding anniversary. I will wake up without my husband still. It should not take this much. It should not have taken 6 years to free a man. It should not have taken 6 years to fight against a narrative from this city when they couldn't be more wrong about my husband, who is the most gentle, the most loving, the most peaceful person I've ever met in my life. And it is why I advocate for him and I fight for him the way that I do. Because I know who he is, and he has been failed by each agency and entity in this entire city. And I will continue to do so until he is brought back home, because he has suffered from the moment those shots were shot at him and hit him. He languished in prison for a crime that he did not commit, and he has suffered tremendously through 5 trials, overall 6. Keith will be the second man in American history to ever be tried this many times. When I think about the accomplishments that I wanted to be there to witness of my husband, that is not one of them. I ask that when you write your stories, when you inform the public and the press, that you keep this in mind. These inconsistencies come from the state's case. For 6 years, I've just needed people to listen to me, to hear, to see for themselves. And I'm so grateful to the support that I now have, and I'm so grateful for the people who look with their own eyes, who did not take my word for it, because after all, I'm just the wife, right? It's easy to discount, but saw for themselves. And like DeRay has said, the truth is here. There's nothing else. It's the strongest thing possible. So now I'm asking that you all also see with your own eyes and stand up, so that we are not doing this 20 years later when Keith is free. That we're not outside at a podium after he is set in jail for decades. Because right now, this is happening right now in front of you. He is a person, he is a husband, he is a father, he is a son. We miss him, we need him, we love him, and we will never stop fighting until he's home with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, DeRay. Thank you, Delphina. And we thank you all for your continued support. As noted in the very beginning, we do have some time for a few questions, a handful of questions. If it so pleases, if you all have any questions, please ask now.
State's Attorney Mosby just held a press conference at almost the same time. She was asked about this new effort and said that she's going to fight for victims in the city of Baltimore, and that her concern in this case is Kevin Jones. What is your response to hearing that from her today?
Well, certainly, the right response would be substance-wise, that's for his new criminal defense team to address. But unfortunately, the response now from civil counsel is a prosecutor's job is to justice. Kevin Jones was taken prematurely, that is correct, but not at the hands of Keith Davis Jr. And so a prosecutor has prosecutorial discretion, and a part of that is to assess, analyze the weight of your case. So to that specific comment, we say this: your obligation and your duty is to all parties in this action. Justice requires that someone not be persecuted simply because it suits you. Ignoring all victims, including Keith Davis Jr., as we recall, he was shot multiple times and still has a bullet lodged in his neck. But ignoring that fact and ignoring the facts is a disservice to our city of Baltimore.
Kelly, can you speak to the support that you've gotten over the years from the public in terms of this movement, and even now the billboard campaign, as you can come up to the mic if you don't mind, that's calling on the state's attorney to drop these charges and free your husband?
Yes, so it was a slow start, but now Keith has, with each trial, actually, incidentally, Keith has gotten more momentum. Every time he has been tried, his support and his team has grown because people can see that this is no longer about justice, this is a persecution. And so the support has been consistent and it continues to grow. And now that we have these billboards and we have all these initiatives taking place, more information is out there. So I know that it will continue to grow. But I'm so extremely grateful because I could not do this alone. I needed the support of the public, of the community, of people like DeRay to just kind of look and say, okay, no, this is wrong. And be willing to stand up because there are so many other people that will tell you that this is wrong and still do nothing. So absolutely, we've had tremendous support and it consistent. And in a way, consistently trying him is almost as you're raising his cause. It's almost as if he's kind of martyrhood at this point because he is being persecuted in this way. And I think that where everyone wants to push their own narrative of who he is and what his life means, I think the community and the supporters and the people who have rallied around him are sending a strong message that justice for Keith Davis Jr. is justice for Kevin Jones, and his life matters and this matter just like anybody else.
Any other questions? Well, again, we thank you all for being here. We thank you all for your frank reporting on this matter. And again, we're here. Free Keith Davis Jr., and we are demanding that these charges be dropped. Thank you all.